Good afternoon, and thanks for joining the third in the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships live chat series. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome, and if you participated in previous chats, welcome back. My name is Salaeha Shariff, and I am the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for the Fellowship Program, and I'll be moderating today's chat. Each month during the application cycle for the 2018-19 S&T Policy Fellowship year, we are hosting a series of live chats. Each chat has a specific theme as an opportunity for you to hear from and connect with fellows of varied discipline backgrounds and career stages. Fellows will be sharing their experience in the program and answering your questions. You can submit a question at any time by clicking in the question box and typing in your question there. Today, we'll be hearing from two fellows who are applying their backgrounds in the social sciences to policy in both the executive and legislative branches of the federal government. The AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships is an immersive policy experience where you spend a year in one of the three branches of the federal government. As a policy fellow, you are taking a step back to retool, reinvigorate, and understand how to apply your background and training broadly to help develop and execute solutions to address today's most pressing societal challenges. In the process, you gain hands-on policy experience and join a highly influential network of fellows. Fellows and a network of over 3,500 alumni represent a broad range of career stages and diverse disciplinary backgrounds. The fellowship program features 3 program areas, and you should consider applying to up to 2 of these areas. You can learn more about each program area, including potential host offices, by visiting the fellowship's website and clicking on the Become a Fellow link. The deadline to apply for the 2018-19 fellowship year is November 1st. Eligibility requirements include holding U.S. citizenship and a doctoral degree in science or engineering. Applicants with a master's in engineering and 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. Visit the fellowship's website for full details about the program areas, eligibility, and the application process. Now I'd like to introduce the 2 fellows joining us today. Amber Hewitt is a Congressional Fellow sponsored by the American Psychological Association, which is a partner society of the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships. Amber is hosted in the office of U.S. Senator Cory Booker. Her policy interests in area include health, education, and child welfare. Amber previously served as a tenure-track assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Akron. Amber received her doctoral degree in counseling psychology. Daniel Hicks is a AAAS S&T Policy Fellow in the executive branch. In the first year of his fellowship, he was hosted by the Environmental Protection Agency, where he worked on the Chemical Safety Research Program. He is currently a second-year renewal fellow hosted at the National Science Foundation, where he's working on the National Robotics Initiative. His work focuses on public scientific controversies such as climate change, genetically modified foods, and vaccines. Daniel received his doctoral degree in philosophy. Thank you, Dan and Amber, for joining us today. Amber and Dan are here to answer your questions and share their fellowship experience, policy insight, and career impact. And again, as a reminder, click the question box to submit your question. Please keep your questions short and directed to a particular individual or the whole panel, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible today. So I'd like, Dan and Amber, I'd like to go ahead and start us off with a question. So oftentimes social scientists hear AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships and assume the fellowship program wouldn't be the right fit for them, and they may have difficulty connecting their background in social science to federal policy. So as social scientists, can you both share why you decided to apply to the S&T Policy Fellowship Program? So Dan, we'll go ahead and start with you first.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this chat. I think the fundamental reason why I was so excited to apply for this policy fellowship was that I've been committed basically since I started graduate school to what in my field we call socially relevant or socially engaged scholarship. So of course, publishing for an audience of academic peers in journals in my field was, important and interesting, but I also wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to see the results of my research and my expertise put to use to make things better for people, to be useful and valuable. And this fellowship has been a fantastic opportunity for me to do that, to work in the federal government for 2 years, and to offer my expertise. And then as well, it's also opened new career paths for me. So my field of philosophy has this reputation for being like the most useless degree. You might remember certain presidential candidates have picked out philosophy as being a useless field. I really don't think that's the case at all, but as a graduate student, I didn't get a lot of training in how to pursue a non-academic career. So this policy fellowship, in itself, the experience working in the federal government has given me a sense of what that means and how to pursue a career in government. And also the fellowship program includes a lot of professional development training that has helped me learn how to write a resume for a nonprofit or for a for-profit job opportunity. So it's also opened up new career paths for me as well.
So not a completely useless degree there.
Yes.
So Amber, same question for you as a social scientist. Why did you decide to apply to the fellowship program?
So, as you mentioned before in my bio, I'm a counseling psychologist by training, and one of our major values is social justice. So similar to what Dan said in graduate school, part of my training was how does psychological research not only apply to our clients or how to use that to contribute to the literature, but how does it affect the real world, and how can we use science to advance sort of the well-being of individuals and communities and society at large. So I always had that frame, but I must admit I didn't know about this pathway in graduate school or even right after graduate school or even when I was in my tenure track position for 3 years. So before I found out about the fellowship, I got involved in advocacy through my professional society, American Psychological Association, where I was able to do a Hill Day here at Capitol Hill and also some state level advocacy. And I was like, oh, okay, psychologists can and should have a seat at the table in policy discussions. And I actually just stumbled upon the call for the fellowship. I had never really known about the fellowship before, hadn't met a fellow. I was actually on APA's website looking for grant applications because I was a professor and trying to make tenure, and I saw the call for this fellowship, and it seemed like a perfect blend of my emerging interest in policy and the intersection of psychology and public policy. So I found out about it at the right time and at a time in my career where I was seeking a transition. Like I liked teaching, I liked research, I liked the one-on-one work with clients and my students and the group level work. But I was pulled more like macro level and systemic level change, and that's what working in federal policy has meant for me, and kind of fulfill that desire to sort of work at more of the systems level.
Great. I really like that sort of the aha moment that you have, that psychologists can and should have a seat at the table. It's really great. So we have first question that's come in is from Allison, and the question is for both of Amber and Dan, is can you speak to your day-to-day work in the fellowship program? So Dan, I'll have you go first. Can you talk a little bit about what you do as day-to-day as a fellow?
Sure. So a big part of what I do more or less falls into the heading of what a lot of social scientists would call content analysis and what philosophers would just call reading. So this is reading through various kinds of documents and applying my background expertise or sort of what I'm learning about the particular work of my host program to, well, it varies a lot depending on what I'm reading. So one example, when I was at EPA, I did this kind of content analysis of concerns that outside experts had about the chemical safety methods that were being developed by my host office. So I reviewed about 300 pages of external reports and identified a set of 10 scientific concerns that these outside experts had about the research that was being done in my host office. Another thing that I do a lot is portfolio analysis. This was both at EPA and in my current position where I'm hosted at NSF. So in both places, these are national programs that fund or conduct research. And so I analyzed the portfolio of research that was being done. This has given me an opportunity to learn some quantitative methods. So my field is primarily, almost exclusively qualitative. So this has been an opportunity for me to learn a bit about bibliometrics and how to do things like a citation network analysis in R, for example. So it's been a great opportunity for me to both apply skills that I had developed through my graduate training and also learn some new quantitative skills that I didn't get in graduate school.
Great. And then Amber, the same question for you, as I imagine it's probably quiet right now on the Hill. That's a little joke, sarcasm.
Yeah, so we were supposed to be sort of going into a nice August recess, but today will probably be a very late night given the healthcare debate happening and amendment process as we speak. On a typical day, it's a mix of attending, well, sitting in and hosting meetings with different advocacy groups, constituents, lobbyists, about various asks that they have for the senator, either educating us on a policy issue, requesting for the senator to co-sponsor a piece of legislation. So a mix of meetings, researching policy. So right now we're researching every amendment that's filed by all senators for this big healthcare process. What else? Writing memos. So if a group comes in and wants the senator to co-sponsor a legislation, meaning that he endorses it, we have to do research for that policy. Has the senator spoken on this issue before, and write a recommendation to the legislative director, which then gets sent up to the chief of staff and then the senator. So meetings, writing, doing research, attending various briefings and hearings that happen. Also, I've had a chance to take the lead on revising legislation that we've introduced before that we're reintroducing. So that's been a fun process of helping to draft legislation, and also starting from scratch. So say this, for example, the senator has an interest in a specific policy area. So going from that idea to a draft piece of legislation. So that involves engaging the stakeholders, doing research, and we have an arm of Congress, kind of an independent body called the Congressional Research Service that we consult with. So a day in a congressional fellowship varies by day and probably varies by with the issue that you're working on, and would vary by the member that you work for as well.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Amanda, and it's for both of you. So she's asking, the question is, could you share the most challenging element that you faced while working as a fellow? So we'll have Dan tackle that one first. Most challenging element as a fellow.
So I think maybe one of the most challenging things for me has been sort of engaging across disciplinary backgrounds. In both of my host offices, I've been working with chemists or biologists, toxicologists, at EPA, at NSF, primarily computer scientists, engineers, roboticists. And in some cases, they haven't even heard of my field of philosophy of science before. They were certainly interested in having me there. That's why I was there. but they didn't have enough familiarity with my field to have a good understanding of, what exactly I had to offer, what skills I could contribute, what my areas of expertise were. This came up during the first 4 months or so of my time at EPA, so during my first year, when we had to do a lot of work to cross those disciplinary divides. What I found was most successful in crossing those divides was to sort of start work on a project that I sort of semi-developed myself, sort of thinking, okay, it seems like this might be what they're asking for, and then talking with them about it. So like I might put together sort of a draft partial analysis of something, or write up a little 3-page research proposal. And we would use these as boundary objects. And, we could talk about, here's what I have to offer. Does this look like what you were asking for? If not, like, how can we use this to move forward to be something that is more useful and relevant to you? Yeah, I think crossing, finding ways to bridge those disciplinary gaps between myself and then the natural scientists and engineers I work with, that's been one of the most challenging things.
And Amber, for you, what did you find to be the most challenging?
I would say something similar, talking across disciplines, but working in a congressional office, you don't really know what discipline you're talking to. You're talking to a staffer, but you don't know what how they frame problems or solutions. So that has been pretty challenging, but coming from a social science, particularly a psychology background, I try to use some of my communication skills, my clinical skills, to sort of figure out, I guess, where the other person is coming from. And also just learning Senate procedure, like today, with the healthcare process and the amendment process that's happening, there's just so many complexities and rules can change. So understanding Senate procedure, understanding the vocabulary, the acronym and alphabet soup of things, and learning how to communicate your background and your discipline in a way that will be received by policy staffers, who have been socialized in this culture. So I don't know, it's a very fascinating place to work. So communicating, I would say communicating has been one of the biggest challenges in understanding different processes of the Senate.
Right, and sort of communicating in a very different way that
Yes.
people are used to, perhaps in academia versus within policy. So this next question actually is from Nicholas, and it's specific to you, Amber. Nicholas is asking did you consider returning to academia after your fellowship, and do you think the transition back to academia is possible? And what experiences do you think would be valuable for someone who is considering returning to a faculty position?
Mm-hmm. So that was a very tough decision for me. I will not be returning to academia. At one point I was considering taking a leave of absence, which my institution would have been perfectly fine with, and I could have just gone back like next month, hypothetically, to the institution where I was teaching before. So I do think that it's possible, and I know other co-fellows who are congressional fellows who are going back to their institution or switching to a different academic position. So they were on, what is it called, on the market, on the market while they were on the fellowship. I have another friend and co-fellow who's doing a postdoctoral fellowship after this, like a research fellowship. So I'm sorry, I feel like I forgot part of the question. So I do think it's possible. And one of the things that I had envisioned if I had gone back is pitching to the chair of the department a policy class, like a policy plus whatever your background is, because I think that's very valuable for students to learn how their science applies to policy. So I definitely think that would be attractive to a department and an institution, but I decided to stay in policy, and this year really solidified that I want to stay at the intersection of psychology and policy within the context of DC and healthcare policy.
I'm actually glad that you brought up that, the possibility of hosting classes for undergraduate in terms of science policy or for graduate students. So a number of our alumni who are in academia who return to academia post-fellowship, oftentimes that is what they do. And in fact, we had an alum of the fellowship program who was just here yesterday at AAAS, and he who went back to Cornell following his fellowship and developed a graduate science policy course, and has been very active with mentoring his graduate students on science policy, and actually brought a few of them here to AAAS yesterday. They had a chance to meet with fellowship, the AAAS fellowship program, as well as learn more about the AAAS mass media, and then the Office of Government Relations, along the work they do. So our alumni do find different ways to be able to take the fellowship experience back to their academic careers. So the next question that we have from Lawrence is for both Tan and Amber, is how do you identify and engage stakeholders as part of your work? And if you can you compare and contrast that with your PhD work? So Dan, how about we'll have you tackle that one first. So how do you identify and engage stakeholders? And then how would you compare and contrast that with the work that you did in academia?
Okay. I guess I'm a little uncertain what the question means by engaged stakeholders. I guess one way to interpret it might be in terms of people who are sort of engaged with the work that I'm doing, or that I find ways to engage with. So how do I find those people? Let's see, I guess within the scope of the fellowship, there's sort of two avenues that come to mind. So first of all, there are the people that you will meet in your host office, and in your interactions within your agency. I don't know any fellow who only interacts with the people in their office and nobody else. We tend to have a bit more flexibility than regular employees. And so fellows tend to get involved with other offices in their same agency, and they'll meet people that way. The community of fellows is also its own sort of parallel parallel system for building connections. So the orientation experience, the first 2 weeks, is extremely intense. You not only learn a lot, but you also meet a lot of really smart, really interesting people who will sort of be your default social group for the next year or two. The folks you meet will be placed at a variety of different agencies with a variety of different disciplinary backgrounds. And so you'll make connections with people who are placed at other agencies but might be working on things that are kind of similar to what you're working on. And this can create opportunities for fellows to work together across agencies in ways that aren't normally available within the federal government, or at least not available very easily. And so the network of fellows that you get as a AAAS fellow is also a really valuable way to sort of build a network of people around you as collaborators for various projects. I hope that's getting what the question is asking for.
Yeah, and actually, Amber, before you answer that, Lawrence has a clarification. So he's saying that when he means stakeholders, he means groups of people who stand to benefit from research and policy decisions as informed by said research. So Amber, if you want to...
Sure. So I was jotting down some notes to kind of organize my response. So how do we identify and engage stakeholders? So I guess I'll give an example. Senator Booker recently reintroduced a bill for family caregivers. So part of my process of revising and redrafting that bill was to engage the stakeholder groups. So for example, advocacy groups who have a strong focus on caregiving, and also the actual home care associations. So typically we want to identify stakeholders within our state, because we're supposed to be representing our state as well. So that was one way that we engage stakeholders. And on the, I guess on the Hill is a little bit different because stakeholders come to us a lot. So we kind of have a bank of groups and individuals and organizations that we kind of call upon when we are thinking about different ideas. Also, using our professional network, like Dan mentioned. So, for example, if the senator has an interest in something that one of my co-fellows is in another office where that member has been a champion for that particular issue, I would sort of reach out that way. And then the second part of the question, comparing and contrasting, that's something that I'm continuing to process because as a social scientist who kind of comes from a social justice perspective, I try not to see people as objects, but also people who have self-agency, and that's kind of a different worldview than sometimes that you get on the Hill. So I would say it's a slightly different framework. But before, I would say I was part of a big stakeholder group, and still am, but like a stakeholder group of providers or mental health clinicians. It is a switch though from what I was doing before. But hopefully, I at least partially answered that question.
Right. So this next question is from Rebecca, and it's focusing on the selection process. So her question is, how did you identify your host office, or how are you placed within your host office? Did you have a choice? And then who makes the decision about the assignment? I know, Dan, you're going to have a very different perspective because executive branch placement is different from the congressional. So Amber, you can kind of answer that from your perspective as well too. So Dan, I'll let you go first. Could you speak a little bit about the executive branch placement and selection process?
Yeah. So, okay. Oh, that actually looks better without the fluorescent light. Okay, so executive branch placement. So in, I think it's the second or third week of April, AAAS brings the executive branch finalists to DC, and you have a week to interview with potential host offices. There's some work in advance to pre-arrange interviews. In my case, I only had a couple of those my first year. And so I spent a lot of time the Monday and Tuesday of the week emailing offices that had indicated they were interested in hosting a fellow. I would send them a one-paragraph email saying, this is my background, my areas of expertise, my policy interests. Do you have time for an interview this week? I ended up with a lot of interviews. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I basically spent on the metro, running around DC, meeting a lot of people and talking about what their office does, what they were interested in, how I might contribute. At the end of the process, the finalists submit to AAAS a ranked list of the places they interviewed with. And the host offices also do the same thing. They submit a ranked list of the fellows they interviewed. There can be a little bit of time for follow-up, but then AAAS does the sort of matching process. And as I understand it, they try to match 1-1 or at most 1-2, so that both the fellow and the host office are getting sort of their first pick if possible. And then AAAS will email the fellow to say the host office wants to make you this offer. Would you like to accept? And both times I went through this process, I got my first choice. I also had a really positive interview experience. Both times I had a number of offices where I was really interested in the work that they were doing. They were really interested in me. And they finished the interview saying, like, when you, Dan, make your decision, we hope you'll consider us. And as someone who had just come off of a really hard academic job search where I applied for 75 positions, had 3 interviews and no job offers, it was remarkably refreshing to have people say to me that they hoped I would pick them. So I had a really positive interview experience. And I think that is the case with a lot of the other fellows. I don't know anyone, I mean, there are people who maybe didn't get quite what they wanted, their first pick, but then you have an opportunity to interview for another placement your second year in the executive branch. And I think people generally find a place where they feel like they have, where their expertise is valued and they have something to contribute as well.
Great. I think that was an excellent summary of the executive branch selection and placement process. So Amber, the congressional placement process is a little bit different, so can you speak to that?
Yes, so unlike the executive branch fellowships where you come to orientation knowing your placement, the congressional fellows like myself come to that orientation in September knowing that they're congressional fellows and sponsored by their society. But I may be mixing up the timeline, but the second week of orientation, actually after the 2 weeks of AAAS orientation, you have another 2 weeks focused just on the congressional fellowship. And one of the major events is where offices, both House and Senate, and committee representation come to this reception where they meet all of the congressional fellows. Before this, though, AAAS compiles a list of offices that have said they want a fellow, so that's considered on the books, meaning that this is the book of options of offices that have had a fellow in the past or heard about the fellowship and have submitted materials. And in those materials, you would see a description of the issue area that they are looking for a fellow to work on, with a little description and who would be your primary mentor. So that is what we use to figure out after that sort of reception where we got to meet our potential mentors. After that, we had a chance to reach out to offices and schedule interviews for those on the book offices, but you can also go off the book as well by contacting offices that may not have heard about the fellowship or maybe just submitted their materials late. So it's an interesting process because you're lining up the interviews yourself. So you're reaching out to the contact, giving them typically a 1 to 2 page CV. So that was a whole other thing. If you're coming from an academic background, sort of putting your information in a more condensed version, even though they would have your full academic CV as well. And then there's an interview process that happens. And so, Leah, you may have to fill in some of the gaps for me because it's I'm blanking on some of the process. But after the interviews that you have, the offers start to come in. And if I'm not mistaken, AAAS guides the offices with a timeline that they would like fellows to be placed in. In my example, though, I got offers before my first offer, which I was able to get in the end. So I had to do some communication with that office. I've got an office from this office, but I really want to be here. So it's definitely an exercise of patience, and this is definitely where I reached out to my sponsoring society for support, and also the AAAS program officers as well that were a really big support. So it's a very different process than the executive branch placement, where you're coming in to DC knowing where you'll be placed at the end.
Right. Amber, I think you did a great job sort of outlining the process. So this next question kind of focuses on post-fellowship and career paths. So this question is from Vanessa, and she's asking, what are some of the types of opportunities that you'd like to pursue following the fellowship? And then I could probably answer this, but I'd like to pose it to both of you as well too. Can you speak to perhaps what you know from some of your fellow fellows and some of the non-academic paths that they're going to be pursuing following the fellowship program? So Dan, how about we have you go tackle that one first?
Sure. So second year in the executive branch is when all of your friends are trying to find jobs at the same time as you. And we're now basically in the last month. And I think a lot of my friends have found opportunities at this point. My situation is still a little bit unsettled, but it should be settled within a couple of weeks. In some cases, executive branch fellows can stay on in their host office. This depends on the agency. So some agencies have sort of a tradition. Well, let me put it this way. In some agencies, it's easier to sort of convert a fellow into a regular federal employee than in other agencies. It also depends, of course, on whether or not the fellow and the host office want to continue working together. Some of my friends, current fellows, are moving into other offices in other agencies in various kinds of positions. So, for example, I have a friend who's going to be who has been at NSF and is going to be a program manager in USDA's research arm. Let's see, other examples. Let's see, I have friends who are going to start tenure-track jobs or were here on sabbatical from a tenure-track position. In terms of my career, I am trying to move into the nonprofit sector. After my time at the EPA, I'm especially excited about environmental policy. And so that's the direction I'm trying to move. I don't know that it will happen right now, but I feel like I have the connections and the knowledge that I need to move my career in that direction over the next couple of years. So nonprofits, especially connected to policy and advocacy, are also very common. A number of fellows go into consulting with government contractors. And of course, there are people who go into industry in various capacities, depending on their background and their interests as well.
So Amber, the same question for you is, what are you thinking in terms of next steps in post-fellowship? And maybe you could speak to what you're going to be doing next year and then following that.
Mm-hmm. So I decided to apply for the Executive Branch Fellowship through AAAS because I wanted to stay in policy and I wanted to have an experience in policy in a different branch of government to see health policy from the perspective of a federal agency. So I applied, and I will be at the National Institute of Mental Health in less than a month in their Office of Science, Policy, Planning, and Communication. So it's one of the NIH institutes. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm excited to get back to my home base, so to speak, in mental health. I'm also open to coming back to the Hill. I mean, this has been a very positive experience, a very exciting year. I really like the work that I did on the Hill. Well, I just spoke in past tense, that I'm doing on the Hill, and I would be open to coming back here. I tell people there are two things I know for sure: that I want to stay in DC and I want to work in federal health policy. So I'm hoping this experience and the next experience at NIH will give me a better idea of what sector I want to work in. So I'm still figuring that out of what I would do after NIH. But some of my colleagues, like I mentioned before, are returning to academia, going on to a research postdoc. Some are still looking. Some are on the academic job market. A handful of us did apply and accept positions in the Executive Branch Fellowship. And in the past, there have been fellows who have stayed on the Hill, who have been hired in as staffers. So I would say in the Congressional Fellowship, it's a range of paths that people are choosing to take.
Yeah, and so Vanessa, getting back to the second part of your question in terms of the different non-academic pathways that fellows pursue, I think both Dan and Amber did a great job of highlighting that. Our alumni fellows go on to pursue career paths in all sectors. A large percentage each year do stay within the policy arena, whether it's through a government position, they may be hired on by their office or through another government agency, or they may work in policy, whether it's a nonprofit, a think tank, or a foundation. So the next question, and I think comes from Allison, I think she's referring to the professional development that AAAS provides the fellows. So the question is, both panelists alluded to the additional training that you received during the fellowship. Can you speak more to this? Are these trainings only organized by AAAS, or can you seek out additional training opportunities throughout your fellowship year? So Dan, how about we'll have you go first?
Yeah. Let's see. So in the executive branch, we get a professional development fund. I think this year it was $4,000. I'm not quite sure whether congressional fellows get something similar to that, but in the executive branch at least, we get $4,000. Some of us use this for things like attending conferences, but it can also be used to pay for external trainees. There are a number of organizations that hold things like, for example, the data science trainings, or they might hold leadership trainings in the DC area. And you can use your professional development funds for those. The AAAS professional development program, I think in the fall, the impression I get is they have a professional development event. They're usually either half day or full day every 2 to 3 weeks in the fall, sort of as people are starting to get settled in DC and into their office. And then once people are settled in January, February, sort of the winter and the spring, the professional development events kind of taper off. And then fellows have an opportunity to organize symposia. These are done through the affinity groups, which are fellows-led sort of organizations by fellows and for fellows on different topics. So for example, there's a social science affinity group, there's a big data affinity group, there's sort of conservation biology affinity group. These affinity groups can work together to apply to AAAS for funding to put on symposia, which are sort of one-day conferences. You could also consider those a professional development opportunity, learning how to put together this kind of event. And so those tend to happen in the summer. Yeah, so that gives you a sense of both AAAS's professional development and other opportunities in the area.
So Amber, what about you? What additional professional development opportunities did you seek out during your fellowship year?
So similar to the pot of money that executive branch fellows get, the sponsoring societies, well, I'll just say my sponsoring society did a lot for funds for professional development. So I was able to attend conferences with those funds. Also, my society, we have monthly lunch meetings on a Friday where we heard from previous APA, Congressional fellows, and executive branch fellows about their experiences. So that was really helpful. I will say it was a little harder for me to get to the AAAS professional development program, which I think is really great and offers a wider array of different opportunities. But it's harder to go to those if the Senate is in session to get away. So a lot of my extra professional development was conferences that were reimbursed and the networking lunches provided by my sponsoring society.
And then just to expand on the AAAS professional development that's provided to the fellows. So the fellowship year begins with the intensive 2-week orientation that Dan and Amber spoke about. And then throughout the fellowship year, we provide fellows with monthly professional development workshops on 3 main tracks. We have a policy track, a communications track, and then a leadership and career pathways track. And it's an opportunity to hone the skill set that you're going to be using throughout your fellowship year, as well as throughout your career. So the next question, so I'm actually going to take a step back and go to some of the advanced questions that we received. So one of the questions we have is, what was the most important or valuable thing you have done or learned during your time as a fellow? So I'll give you guys a moment to kind of think about that, because that is a very large question, and then whoever kind of wants to go first. So the most important or valuable thing you've done or learned as a AAAS S&T policy fellow.
I can start, Dan, if that's okay. I would say 2 things. One is, again, just solidifying that social scientists, and particularly in my sense, psychologists, have and should have a seat at the table when it comes to policy. So that was valuable for me to sort of be here for almost a year and realize that this could be a setting that I could work in. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but it was a validating and a valuable experience. And I would say one of the most exciting things happened last week when I was able to go down in the Capitol to the cloakroom, where is this kind of mysterious room with this person sitting on the outside of it, where you hand the bill to, and the bill then magically appears on congress.gov hours later or the next day, and is sort of introduced in this Congress. So that was very exciting, because I've been working on that bill for pretty much ever since I matched in Senator Booker's office. So that was a very exciting thing, to be able to see something get introduced, a piece of legislation that you had a small part in.
And then Dan, what would you say is the most important or valuable experience of your fellowship?
Yeah, well, sort of the first thing I came up with was actually very close to what Amber said, like recognizing the value that my expertise had in a policy context. But I think I can do something a little bit different and complementary. So a lot of the research in my area is already policy relevant, and there are people working in my field who look at things like how the National Science Foundation makes decisions, or how the Environmental Protection Agency makes decisions. But that research has been conducted from outside, and so being sort of behind the closed doors and watching how those decisions are made, are actually made, or looking at NSF's internal data, for example, has really complicated my understanding of the relationship between science and policy, even though I think I had maybe a more sophisticated understanding because of my academic background than, for example, an ecologist or an engineer who comes in as a fellow. Even though I maybe had a more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between science and policy, actually seeing how the two interact sort of live in real time has been a really valuable and really informative and also really exciting and interesting experience for me.
So this next question relates to kind of pre-fellowship. So if someone's looking to apply to the program, what advice would you give them in terms of building their portfolio to make themselves a more competitive applicant? And how should someone leverage both their academic and professional experience to stand out as a fellowship applicant?
So I think I can say something here. Let's see. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is that you know, in the application process, you'll be asked about your standard kinds of scholarly or academic achievements, you know, the papers that you've published, the research that you've done, and that's something that's taken into account, but it has much less weight than it would in an academic context, which probably is obvious when you stop to think about it for a second, but it may not be obvious going in. I haven't participated in the application process from the other side, so I haven't been like a reviewer yet, although it's something I might do in the future. My understanding, though, is that what they're really looking for is the way they identify potential fellows is by looking for people who are excited about putting their science, their expertise, and their knowledge to use in a policy context. And so they're looking for evidence of that. So I think what they like to see are things like public engagement, interdisciplinary work, especially interdisciplinary work that can somehow be relevant to policy. Now this doesn't mean that you have to like run for office before you apply, but if there's evidence that you're doing things like engaging with the community, say around your university when you're in graduate school, or that you're doing you know, outreach or public communication of your research, I think those kinds of things can be even more impressive than a lot of papers in prestigious journals.
And then Amber, what advice would you have to someone who's looking to stand out as an applicant?
I echo Dan's points, particularly the public engagement and public communication piece. The public engagement piece, I think, is important as evidence of sort of your excitement or your interest in how your particular science interacts with policy. And I would also say having some understanding, again, again, the fellowship is a fellowship for you to learn, but having some understanding of what policy issues speak to your particular academic expertise. So having some idea of how that intersection may already be playing out right now and how you could expand upon that. So I would say that would be the only piece that I would add to what Dan already said.
Great. So unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I wanted to wrap up by quickly asking both Amber and Dan to share some parting advice for someone who is thinking about applying to the fellowship and delving into science policy. What advice would you give them?
I guess I would say do it.
Yeah, I would say
do it. Just do it.
Like, it's really, for me, it's been a kind of zero regret kind of situation. Now, I didn't have, an academic career waiting for me, but a lot of my friends did, and they were able to arrange, to either take a leave of absence for a year if they were already established, or to sort of delay starting their position for a year in order to do this fellowship. And I don't know anyone who thinks like they wasted their time or that they didn't learn anything or anything like that. So my advice would be, like, if you think you might be interested, go for it.
Great advice. And then Amber, what advice would you give?
Similar to what Dan said, I would just add that it may feel risky, and that's okay, because it definitely felt a little risky because it's so different, and I hadn't met a lot of people who were working in science policy, but I'm glad I took the risk. So if it feels risky and you're interested and excited, I would say go for it and apply.
Great. So that brings us to the end of our time, and I wanted to thank both Dehan and Amber for joining us today and sharing your fellowship experience and policy insight with us. And I wanted to thank you, the audience, for joining and for all of your great questions. And if we weren't able to answer your question today, please send us an email at fellowships@AAAS.org. And the next chat in our monthly series will feature fellows discussing why mid-career was the right time to apply to the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships. You'll also have a chance to learn more about the Judicial Branch Fellowship and how judicial fellows are applying their scholarship to the fellowship experience. You can find a list of all of our upcoming chats as well as on-demand links for previous chats in this series on the fellowship's website. And as a reminder, we're currently accepting applications for the 2018-19 fellowship year, and the application deadline is November 1st. Visit the fellowship's website for more information and details related to the application process, as well as all the eligibility requirements. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.